It's 2:47 on a freezing February morning in Nebraska. The interstate is empty, the rest area parking lot is full, and every single one of those parked semi-trucks is running. Engines chugging, exhaust plumes rising into the cold air. Drivers asleep in their bunks while 1,500 horsepower idles away inches from their heads. Most people see this and think one thing: what a waste. But here is what you don't see. Inside one of those cabs, a driver named Mike is hooked up to a CPAP machine. The device keeping him alive while he sleeps runs off 12 volts from the truck's electrical system. If that engine shuts off, the batteries die by morning. If the batteries die, the CPAP stops. And if the CPAP stops, Mike doesn't wake up. It is that simple. In the truck next to him, a refrigerated trailer carries $30,000 worth of insulin. The pharmacy shelves in Chicago need that delivery by noon. If the engine cuts out, the temperature rises, and that insulin is worthless before the sun comes up. And in the truck 3 rows back, a driver from Minnesota knows that if he shuts down in this cold, his diesel fuel will turn to wax. The fuel filters will clog. He will spend tomorrow morning waiting for a tow instead of making his delivery. So they all keep running, not because they are wasteful, not because they are lazy, because the alternative is worse. Here is the thing most people miss completely. A semi-truck isn't just a big vehicle. It's a rolling apartment, a refrigerated warehouse on wheels, and a machine built around a 13-liter diesel engine that has very strong opinions about being shut off in freezing weather. Inside that cab, there is a sleeper berth, a full bunk in the back where drivers are legally required to rest for 10 hours between shifts. That is not a suggestion. That is federal law. The Department of Transportation says you cannot drive more than 11 hours without taking a 10-hour break. So when that truck is parked at a rest stop, the driver is essentially home for the night. And that engine idling? It is running the heat, it is running the air conditioning, it is running the power outlets for phones, laptops, refrigerators, and medical devices. Sometimes it is running the entire refrigerated trailer hooked behind it. So when the truck is parked, it is actually still working. It never really stops. But here is where people get it wrong. The common reaction is just turn it off and start it back up in the morning. That's what you do with your car. It works fine. But a diesel engine is not a Toyota Camry, not even close. Diesel engines don't use spark plugs. They use compression. They squeeze air so hard it gets hot enough to ignite the fuel on its own. That process needs heat to work well. A cold start in freezing temperatures means incomplete burning, extra strain on the cylinders, and wear on engine parts before the oil has even warmed up and spread around properly. Recent research from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers quantifies exactly how brutal cold starts really are. At 20 below zero, the bearings at the far end of the oil gallery experience dry friction for precious seconds before oil arrives. Those seconds of metal-on-metal contact cause measurable wear. But here is the fascinating part. If the oil gallery is pre-filled to just 80% before startup, that bearing wear drops by more than half, 50% less damage just from having oil waiting in the lines. The same research shows that heating oil to just 40 degrees Celsius, about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, virtually eliminates dry friction during startup. The higher the oil temperature, the less wear. But there is a sweet spot. Heating oil above 100 degrees doesn't buy you much extra protection. You are just burning energy for no reason. This is why mechanics will tell you that a single cold start below freezing puts wear on the engine equal to 300 to 500 miles of normal driving. That's like adding a full day's worth of highway miles every single morning before the truck even leaves the parking lot. Every cold start in winter is a small act of violence against the engine. But engine wear is actually the secondary reason. Here is the first. The sleeper cab is a real living space with real power demands. In January, at a truck stop in Minnesota or Wyoming or upstate New York, temperatures can drop to 20 below zero Fahrenheit overnight. That is cold enough to freeze diesel fuel in the lines if the engine shuts off completely. Diesel gels at low temperatures. Wax crystals form, clogging filters and stopping fuel flow. If that happens, the truck is not going anywhere until someone thaws out the entire fuel system. The idle runs the heat. It keeps the fuel flowing. It keeps the driver alive in a very literal sense. Long-haul trucks typically idle about 6 hours per day, or around 1,800 hours per year. That varies depending on where they are and what they are hauling, but the pattern is consistent. When the driver sleeps, the engine stays on. But there is another layer most people never think about. A large number of long-haul truck drivers use CPAP machines at night, those breathing devices for people with sleep apnea. A CPAP machine running at maximum setting can consume up to 800 watt-hours over a night. That is enough to drain a standard truck battery bank by morning. No engine running means no power. No power means no CPAP. And a driver who cannot use their medical equipment is not just uncomfortable, they are a safety risk on the road the next morning. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration actually addresses this. Drivers with sleep apnea are required to use their CPAP devices. If they cannot, they are not medically cleared to drive. So the idle is partly a medical necessity. A driver keeping their CPAP running is complying with federal safety regulations. Some newer trucks have dedicated battery systems mounted under the bunk specifically for running CPAP machines and other appliances. These batteries are isolated from the truck's main starting batteries and can power a CPAP for several nights without recharging. But not every truck has that setup. For many drivers, the main engine is still the only option. Then there's the trailer. Refrigerated trailers, called reefers, carry everything from fresh strawberries to insulin to flu vaccines. They need to stay at exact temperatures, sometimes as precise as 34 degrees, all night long. If the engine cuts off and the trailer warms up, the cargo is lost. That is thousands of dollars of medicine or produce gone in a few hours. The science of refrigerated transport is surprisingly precise. A reefer unit isn't just blowing cold air, it is managing a complex heat balance. The refrigeration system must remove heat from three sources: residual air inside the trailer, heat infiltrating through the walls and door seals, and heat generated by the respiration of the produce itself. Fruits and vegetables actually create heat as they continue to ripen. The warmer they get, the faster they respire, creating even more heat. This is why pre-cooling matters so much. A trailer should be cooled down for at least 4 hours before loading. The cargo itself must be at the correct temperature before it goes in. If you load warm produce and try to cool it in transit, you risk chilling injury to the product nearest to the evaporator. The temperature difference between the delivery air and the return air can be as much as 7 degrees Celsius if the system isn't set up right. For frozen cargo, the rules are different. Deep frozen products can handle more variation, but for fresh produce, the temperature must be controlled within a window of about 1 degree above set point to 1.5 degrees below. Any wider, and you risk spoilage or freezing damage. Some reefers have their own independent diesel engines mounted on the front of the trailer. Those run all night too. But many trailers rely on the truck's engine to keep the refrigeration unit running through an electrical connection. No truck engine, no cold chain. And here's where it gets legally complicated. More than 30 states have anti-idling laws. They're designed to reduce emissions and noise near residential areas. California was one of the first, passing a regulation in 2005 that limited idling to 5 minutes for sleeper cab trucks. The rule applied to both California-registered trucks and out-of-state trucks operating in California. It required new trucks starting in 2008 to have automatic engine shutdown systems. But nearly all these laws carve out specific exceptions for exactly the situations we've been talking about. Take Delaware's regulations. They explicitly allow idling for the necessary power for a heater, air conditioner, or any ancillary equipment during sleeping or resting in a sleeper berth. They also exempt vehicles idling when the temperature drops below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Other states have similar rules. So, the truck idling all night is not an oversight. It's not a violation. It's following one set of laws while legally navigating an exception in another. One parked truck, two sets of rules, both applying at the same time.
The Environmental Protection Agency even has specific categories for this in their emissions modeling. They distinguish between normal running exhaust, start exhaust, and something they call extended idle exhaust. It is a recognized category because it is a recognized reality. Trucks idle for long periods, and regulators know it. Now, here is the part that sharpens the picture. Not all truck drivers face this problem. Day cab drivers, the ones doing local routes and going home every night, they park, lock up, and leave. Their trucks don't have sleeper berths. No one is sleeping inside. No idle needed. But long-haul sleeper drivers live a completely different life. That truck is their home. They're away from their families for weeks at a time. They eat in that cab. They sleep in that cab. They watch TV in that cab. Idling overnight is the same as leaving your apartment's heater running while you sleep. You wouldn't turn it off and freeze. Neither would they. The industry came up with a solution called an APU, Auxiliary Power Unit. Think of it as a small, separate generator, roughly the size of a large suitcase, bolted onto the side of the truck. It runs the heat, the air conditioning, and the power outlets without firing up the main engine. Cleaner, more efficient, smart design. The numbers tell the story. Idling burns about 0.8 of a gallon per hour. Over a 10-hour rest period, that is 8 gallons. At $4 a gallon, that is $32 a night. Multiply that by 300 nights a year, and you're looking at nearly $10,000 in fuel just for sleeping. A diesel APU burns about a quarter of that, roughly 0.2 of a gallon per hour. That's a 75% fuel savings right off the top. An electric APU burns no fuel at all, though it may need occasional engine running to recharge its batteries. Maintenance savings are even bigger. The generally accepted rule in the industry is that 1 hour of idling equals about 25 miles of driving wear on the engine. If a truck idles 10 hours a night for 300 nights, that's 75,000 miles of equivalent wear per year. That's extra oil changes, extra filter changes, extra everything. Diesel APUs need maintenance too, about $300 to $600 per year for oil and filter changes. But that is far less than the engine wear they prevent. Electric APUs need almost no routine maintenance, just cleaning and inspections. But here's the catch. An APU costs between $8,000 and $12,000 installed. An electric APU costs even more upfront, though the latest lithium battery versions can provide 10 to 17 hours of cooling with zero fuel burn. That's a suitcase-sized box that costs as much as a used Honda Civic. The return on investment math actually works. At $32 a night in fuel savings, an $8,000 APU pays for itself in about 250 nights, less than a year of operation. But that assumes the driver can front the cost. Independent owner-operators running on tight margins often cannot. And even when they can, they have to trust that the APU will be reliable, that it won't break down at 2 in the morning in the middle of winter. Some fleets have done the math and made the switch. About 14% of fleets in a recent study reported using diesel APUs. Another 7% use electric APUs. But adoption is slow because it requires upfront investment, driver training, and maintenance discipline. An APU that isn't maintained properly will fail, and a failed APU means the main engine idles anyway. There's another option too, shore power hookups. Basically outdoor electrical outlets that let trucks plug in like a phone charger. The concept has been around since at least the 1990s, when an industry group called the Truck Stop Electrification Alliance formed to promote it. But the infrastructure never really took off. Today, there are only about 2,000 electrified parking spots across the entire country, spread out across maybe 150 locations. If you're parked anywhere else, plugging in isn't an option. This is the part everyone misses. Trucking hasn't always looked like this. Go back to the early days of long-haul freight in America, the 1940s. 2-lane highways, no interstates, diners every 50 miles. Drivers slept in the seat or paid for a motel room. There were no sleeper berths. But then the interstate highway system started going in during the late 1950s, and suddenly runs got longer, much longer. You could drive from Chicago to Los Angeles without stopping for a town. Sleeper cabs started showing up in the 1960s to match those longer routes, and the diesel engines of that era were genuinely brutal about cold starts. So brutal that mechanics at truck depots would drain the oil out of engines at night, store it warm indoors, and pour it back in before the morning start. That's not a joke. That was the actual solution. Idling overnight was a massive improvement from that.
So by the 1970s and 1980s, running the engine all night was simply how it was done. It was baked deep into trucking culture, into maintenance habits, into the way fleets trained new drivers. And here is the problem with deeply baked habits. They outlast the original reason. Better oil technology, better engine design, APUs, shore power, but the behavior stayed. Here is the surprise. You have been touching this system your whole life without knowing it. That banana you ate in January, it rode in a refrigerated trailer that idled overnight at a distribution center somewhere in the South. That Amazon order that showed up at your door on a hot July afternoon. Reefer truck running all night at a fulfillment center. The insulin at your local pharmacy. Cold chain logistics, idle dependent every step of the way. The weird diesel smell you noticed at a highway rest area on a family road trip, that was a cluster of drivers sleeping legally, doing their required 10-hour break with the heat running. The price of groceries at your store, partly built from fuel costs, and idle fuel is part of that number. If you have ever used a CPAP machine, the same device is running off idle power in sleeper cabs tonight across the country. Those no idle signs you might have seen at certain truck stops, they exist because of the complicated 30-state patchwork of anti-idle laws. Fleet GPS systems now flag idle time automatically as a cost metric. Dispatchers watch it like a fuel leak because every gallon burned going nowhere is profit evaporating. Every cold chain product in the refrigerated section of your grocery store, the cheese, the yogurt, the pre-made meals, stayed cold partly because a truck somewhere kept running through the night. Now for the real trade-off. Diesel exhaust from idling is not nothing. It puts fine particles into the air near rest stops and truck terminals. The California Air Resources Board estimates that heavy-duty trucks operating in California emit about 53 tons per day of smog-forming nitrogen oxides. About a quarter of that comes from trucks registered out of state, most of them sleeper cabs. That is why neighborhoods close to freight corridors pushed for those anti-idle laws in the first place. It's a real concern. It's fair. A fleet of 1,000 trucks idling 8 hours a night is burning roughly 8,000 gallons of diesel while going absolutely nowhere. That's real pollution, real health impacts for people living near truck stops. The good news is the industry is actively changing. Electric APUs powered by lithium batteries are getting better every year. They're lighter, charge faster, and last longer than the old lead-acid systems. Some can now last the full 10-hour rest period without needing a recharge. Shore power infrastructure is slowly expanding along major freight corridors. Some newer trucks have automatic engine shutdown systems that kick in when conditions allow. If the temperature is mild and the batteries are charged, the engine just turns itself off. And electric semi-trucks are still early, but they're coming. They change the idle equation completely because their cab systems run off the battery pack, not the engine. No idle, no emissions, no noise. The idling habit is genuinely shrinking, but it's shrinking slowly because the gap between we have a better solution and every driver can afford the better solution is still wide. So here's where you land. You pulled into that rest stop at 2 in the morning thinking you were looking at waste, laziness, a bad habit that nobody bothered to fix. But what you were actually looking at was a federal rest requirement, diesel engine physics that scientists are still studying with computational fluid dynamics and bench tests, a medical device running in the back of a cab, keeping a driver alive so he can safely haul your freight tomorrow. A trailer full of temperature-sensitive cargo that someone's prescription depends on. A 70-year-old industry habit with very logical roots and an infrastructure problem that is still being solved one truck stop at a time. That sound you used to find annoying, that's the hum of the system that stocked your fridge this morning. The driver inside that cab is not being lazy, he's not being wasteful, he's doing exactly what the law requires, what the engine demands, and what the cargo needs. He's sleeping in his home, keeping his medicine running, and making sure the food you eat tomorrow stays cold tonight. And next time you see that row of trucks rumbling in the dark, you'll know. That sound is not noise, it's the price of having fresh strawberries in January. It's the sound of the supply chain not breaking. The trucks will keep running. They have to, because the alternative is a system that doesn't work, and a system that doesn't work means empty shelves, spoiled medicine, and drivers who can't breathe at night. So, let them rumble. They've earned it.